morning. Hey, how is everybody doing this morning? I hope everybody had a great evening last night. I have got to tell you, the best thing I've watched in a long time sorry, was Recovery Addict last night. If you guys missed it, you've got to go back and watch Recovery Addict talking about the expert yesterday in the Karen Reed trial. He was so funny. You guys have got to go watch that in case you missed it. It was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. But that is not why we're here right now. Right now, we are here for the Phil Spector trial. Hello, my name is Debbie. Welcome to my channel. Okay, we were on, I know it's been a while. We were on Detective Pex. Yay, Nancy's been a member for 3 months. Thank you so much, Nancy, for being here and your support. That is wonderful. This is, forgot his name, Pex. His last name is Pex. I remember that because that's an odd last name. James Pex. And he is a blood spatter expert, I believe, if I am remembering correctly, because he did some kind of experiment with a paint cannon. So court is going to start late today. They're starting at 10 instead of 9. So he has 2 more parts of his testimony. We're still not going to have time to get through all of it, but we're going to get through a good chunk of it today. So, as usual, let's see what Judy has for us today. In 1969, Spector was called in to salvage the Beatles' Let It Be album, a troubled production marked by dissension within the band. Although Lennon praised Spector, Paul McCartney was enraged. Did I say that right? Enraged. I said it wrong the first time I said it, I think. Stuff like that used to really, really embarrass me when I did it on a live stream, and now it's just like everybody says words wrong every once in a while. Especially when Spector added strings and a choir to McCartney's The Long and Winding Road. Years later, McCartney would oversee a remixed Let It Be, removing Spector's contributions. Wow. Oh, wasn't it great? It was so great. Like, he's snarky, but like he was on a roll last night. Like, yes, let's trap RA in a car with the kids for hours all the time and then let him live stream. Because that was gold, man. That was gold. Absolutely. That was gold. Fun fact about the Beatles. The Beatles' official breakup was at Disney World, because that's where John Lennon was when he signed his whatever you call them, the papers to break up the band, disillusion, I don't know what you call them, whatever papers, the legal papers for the breakup of the band. I don't know what they're called, but they were signed at Disney World because he and Yoko Ono were at Disney World. So that's where he signed the paper. So that's where the band officially broke up. And of course, I know that because I'm a Disney adult and it means something to me. It's just important to me. I don't know why. It just is. I guess so. I mean, but isn't that what music producers do? Go to the studio? Like, that's kind of their job. Disney, actually, I don't know if it's Disney World or Disneyland. I think it's Disney World. Disney World opened in 1972. I was 3. My dad was on traffic detail for Disney World's opening. No, not anymore. It's not. It was back then. It was back then, even though that's where the Beatles broke up. It still was the happiest place on earth back then. Now it's a cesspool of I don't know what. I've not been in I can't remember how many years since I've been. I miss old Disney. I'm afraid to go to new Disney. But I do we're if I can talk him into I thought I had him talked into it. Now I don't know if I have him talked into it. I had him talked in to going to Epcot for our anniversary because that's where we had our honeymoon, and we want to ride that new Guardians of the Galaxy roller coaster. Bad. That is going to be so much fun. We've watched the video so many times. It just looks like an amazing. It's an indoor. I like indoor roller coasters. It's an indoor roller coaster with projection screens and stuff, and it looks like you're in space. And I want to go so bad. Oh, that's a good point. That is a very good point. Oh, well, at least you've been there. A lot of people never get to go, which breaks my heart because I feel like every child should get to go to Disney World in their lifetime at least once. I just realized how fortunate I am that I grew up in Florida and got to go to Disney so many times as a child and an adult. It's my happy place. I like Universal better though. The the handicap accommodations are excellent. The staff will bend over backwards for you. Disney used to be that way, but they're not anymore. They got greedy. Greedy. Universal's nice. They treat you like you're, what you are. You're a paying customer and they treat you as such. Um, I don't know about Disney. I've heard stories that they are nowhere near as courteous and customer friendly as they used to be. I know Jill needs to come down here and stay with me for a week or two, and we need to hit all the tourist attractions. That's just what needs to happen. And leave Addis alone. Addis alone. Addis at home, is what I meant to say. So we can do some water parks. He can stay here and shoot the breeze with Travis, and then we can go do some water parks. Um, except I'm not doing any more steep slides because that airtime does not work with my unpadded butt. Butt is too flat. That's what the problem was. I didn't have any cushioning back there. I need to get one of those. They make panties with cushion in the back for people that have flat butts like me. And I guess I need to get a pair and put in my bathing suit to cushion my butt for the water slides. Because maybe if I'd had that, I wouldn't have hurt my butt bone on that water slide. We went to Epcot and Animal Kingdom for our honeymoon. The thing with Disney is that there's only like a couple roller coasters at each park. So when I had the annual pass, a lot of times I would just go and from park to park to park and just ride the roller coasters. So that's the bummer. I mean, I like the slow kiddie rides too, but if you want like thrill rides, you got to go to Universal to get thrill rides. Oh, by the way, I just sent you guys a link to the is it the Tilted Lawyer about the police reports on her. Okay, let's get started.
One couple questions in text. The bullet, when it comes out of the barrel, is that being propelled by energy?
Yes.
And about how fast does the bullet come out of a barrel in a gun such as a .38 caliber?
Somewhere, depending upon the type of cartridge it's used, 700 and 1,000.
A lot of energy.
You have to get from zero to that velocity in a matter of a few inches.
Okay. And so with that energy, we left off, we were starting to discuss something called Boyle's Law, and you explained it to the jury as best as we can all understand it. And is that applicable when you have this intraoral wound?
And it has some basics that apply, yes.
Tell us where it's applicable and why it also may not be applicable.
Sure. Boyle's Law deals, as I indicated, and I'll repeat what it means. It's for a fixed volume or a fixed mass amount of gas at a fixed temperature. The pressure and the volume is a constant. To be able to evaluate the pressure, this would have to be within a closed container. In an explosion, you have the generation of heat, and you have some maximum heat that occurs, which means that under Boyle's Law, there's going to be an expansion of these gases and an increase in pressure. It's this increase in pressure and the expansion of gases, the volume, that pushes the bullet out the barrel. And so it applies from that standpoint. Their pressure and increase the volume, which applies to another law called Charles' Law.
Okay. Now, when you have chipmunk cheeks, would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what does the fact that the gases are coming out of the mouth mean in terms of whether or not they're constant?
The problem is that these gases that are exiting the mouth are now coming in contact with an open environment, and they're going to reach some point of equilibrium with that open environment. And at some point, force is going to be zero. And the broader the exposure, to the atmosphere, the sooner that that's going to happen. A simple analogy is blowing out a candle. If you purse your lips, you can blow out a candle at a greater distance than if you tried to blow out a candle with your mouth wide open.
And does that cause then the particulates that are taken out in this explosion to go further?
Yes.
And do they dissipate equally then all around, or do they go any which way?
Well, they would travel in the direction of force and the movement of these expanding gases until the issue of the gases is resolved and gone.
Okay. Now, when you have the expanding gases in the mouth coming out of the mouth, does that in any way affect the size of the particulates?
No, that's an interesting question. I don't think it's been really resolved by at least any physics principles that I'm aware of. Is the amount of energy required to come up with a particular droplet size. We know that if you just take a drop of blood from a dropper and just drop it to the floor, what we refer to as passive blood droplets, the only effect is the weight of the droplet and gravity, they're all going to be about the same size. As you apply more energy, for example, if there was some liquid blood on this tabletop and I hit it with my hand, the droplets would be smaller because I'm applying more energy into that liquid surface. When you deal with applying energies as great as would occur with a firearm, then you get very small droplets that we're talking about in a millimeter sort of size. Where it gets complex is that sometimes you have a circumstance where a person is bleeding and just dripping blood into liquid blood, and you can also get very small droplets in that. So how do you apply a constant physical principle to that?
Now, when you talked about the energy that goes into an intraoral wound, can you tell the jurors why that's different from something, for instance, a head wound with a gun, interpreting blood spatter?
In the article that I published, we were basically attempting to duplicate a surface that where the blood is right on the surface, for example, in an external head wound shot. You have a shallow cavity in which these gases are going to go into. You're going to strike bone very quickly. There's going to be expansion of these gases under the skin, which isn't very deep, and then they're going to come back towards the shooter, and as they affect the atmosphere, you basically, if you have a vertical surface there, you have a 180-degree environment for these gases to expand until such time they reach equilibrium with the atmosphere.
Why is the fact in that type of wound where you have a 180-degree area for them to expand different than an intraoral wound?
An intraoral wound would be more of a deeper cavity. It'd be a more focused return of these suspended droplets. They would have more initial velocity or initial energy behind them, which might transport them farther.
Now, in your article, you also had some pictures of what backspatter may look on a shooter's sleeve, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Jen, can we have, and Judge will need this marked cuff?
This would be octuple W.
Okay. I have a copy up here, Mr. Pex, in case you can't see that.
What comes after octuple?
Yes.
Okay. Is this a true copy of the picture that is in your article?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And you discussed your observations in terms of backspatter on a shooter's arm in that article.
Yes, I did.
Okay. And what is it that we are looking at up here?
What you're looking at is my hand and the lab coat that I was wearing at the time that I was conducting some backspatter experiments with a weapon.
Okay. And what purpose were you doing that for?
What we were demonstrating there is the small droplets of blood that land on the sleeve of my lab coat.
Okay. And why were you demonstrating that?
Had some cases that we had this where I observed these small droplets on the sleeve of an accused. And it was important to know whether or not how this might have occurred. And so we did these experiments to attempt to reconstruct the particular shooting scenario as we knew it, and is it possible that these droplets could have got there by the process of what we refer to as backspatter.
And when you were looking at these experiments, you're looking to see, correct me if I'm wrong, whether or not the distribution and location of spatter would be on somebody who was a shooter.
Yes.
Okay. And sir, if may I approach, Your Honor?
Oh, yes.
If I came up to you, excuse me, I'll pull my back, that's slow. If I came up to you and I was on equal level with you, which I'm not, and I'm still not, but and I put a gun into your mouth, you turn to this way.
Okay.
And I put a gun into your mouth and shot you, where would you expect to find backspatter?
On the exposed area, if you don't mind remaining here.
You may have to help me back up.
Okay.
Oh, it's getting old this time.
All right.
You two want a moment together? Or?
We've had several moments together already.
To come up once more? Okay, I'm getting a little closer. It's awful different view up here, Judge.
If your hand is turned, for example, like this, your wrist is bent, then the exodus of the fine particulates would be on the weapon, and they would land on the inner surface of your sleeve here, okay? If your hand was pointed down like this, then this area of the hand would be protected. You would see more of them perhaps in this area.
What about the inner portion of my, I'm not wearing a,
Right.
yeah.
If you're, like I said, if your hand is bent at the wrist like this, then I would expect that you would see something here.
Okay. And if you're facing me and I have my hand and my arm in front of you and your head slightly turned, where would you expect to find?
The projection of materials from my mouth would be within the scope or a cone in the direction that my head is facing.
Okay. Excuse me, but I may have to use your hand to get down. Would that be true of all particulates, for instance, if teeth were expelled out of the mouth?
I would presume yes.
Hypothetically, if there is no spatter on a right arm of a person who allegedly shot a gun in an intraoral wound such as I just demonstrated, would that be consistent with the person being the shooter if there's no spatter?
It would be inconsistent.
If there is a blood spatter on someone's arm under the upper right sleeve under here, would that be consistent or inconsistent?
Well, remember these things don't go around corners and they don't curve, so that would have to be an exposed area if that indeed is a blood spatter droplet.
And exposed area, I see you had your hand up like mine, my arm is bent. The arm would have to be exposed like this?
In some manner like that.
Okay, not like this down where I'm doing it right here.
Correct.
Now, you also discussed in that article identification of blood spatter, did you not? Or identification of blood?
Yes.
Okay. And you have been a serologist and you have looked under blood under a microscope in the past. Can you see
That's not what
can you see
definition of
blood
means.
and identify it as blood under a stereo microscope?
As you look at small stains like this under a microscope, it is certainly a presumptive test that might be blood. At this point, you need to go on to do further tests to confirm that it is indeed blood.
Okay. And in fact, did you have another picture in that same article concerning a stereo microscope photomicrograph of what may be seen or may not be seen?
Yes.
Okay. And Jennifer, Your Honor, I will need this marked microblood.
This would be octuple X.
And if we could highlight that portion up there, Jennifer. What is the magnification level that you were discussing in your article as to whether or not blood could be identified under a microscope?
This particular photograph is at 130 times.
Okay. And are we looking at any nuclei or anything that identifies this as blood?
No, what you're looking at is a particulate that later is tested and is found to indeed be blood. The magnification is such that up in the upper corner at about 11 o'clock, there is a groove that is taking this from a fiber. And that's looking at a piece of fiber on a cloth, that's how much it is magnified. This is a droplet of this size containing hundreds of thousands of individual red cells.
Okay. And can you see any red cell of blood under a stereo microscope at a 63 magnification?
Not in a dried blood stain.
Okay. Do you know of any procedure in any ASCLD lab that you've either run, audited, or reviewed their procedures for where there was an approved ASCLD procedure for identifying blood under a microscope, under a stereo microscope at a 63-degree magnification?
No, it's certainly the purpose of a microscopic exam is to locate an area. In your opinion, you formulate an opinion that is maybe consistent with blood, but if you're going to prove that it's blood, you're going to have to carry on and demonstrate that by some other means.
When ASCLD, when you were doing it in 2002, when ASCLD certifies a procedure in a lab, did a procedure have to be written?
Yes.
And did it also have to have a validation study in any way attached to it?
Yes. If you wanted to come up with a new method, for example, for the identification of blood, you would have to go through a validation process.
What does that mean?
That means that your procedure would have to be scrutinized by others in your profession, and all that's from a standpoint of running a number of unknown samples to see whether or not and is capable of whatever you're doing by matchup that you could differentiate from blood.
Okay. And when you reviewed the manual of the LASD, did you see any written procedure approved by ASCLD to identify blood under a microscope at a 63-degree magnification?
No.
And as you sit here today, do you know of any lab that has any such approved ASCLD procedure?
No.
Have you ever heard of it before?
No, I've been looking at blood for 40 years. I know how to do it and what is acceptable and what is not.
Okay. And when you identify blood, do you have to put it through a confirmatory procedure?
Yes.
And what are some of the confirmatory procedures that are approved in your area?
One of the earliest techniques you would ask that. TAKA Yama.
Okay, was there any
Close
other?
enough? Okay.
Was there any other procedures?
There are tests, immunoprecipitin techniques that identify a stain as being human blood. There are what are called hemotrace tests that will identify, successful in performing DNA, will identify something as human blood.
Okay. And does the recoil of a gun have anything to do with how any particulates come out of an intraoral wound, for instance?
Well, let's back up for a minute when we talk about a weapon and its recoil.
Well, let me explain. What do you mean by recoil? That's probably should have been my first starting point.
Okay. When you discharge a weapon, there actually is a primary and a secondary recoil. The first recoil is that of getting a mass in motion, which is a bullet, and getting it out the end of the barrel. There is a secondary recoil that is created by the gases that exit the end of the barrel. They have a force back towards the barrel as well. And in some weapons, you can poke holes in the end of the barrel and divert these gases to the side to reduce the recoil. If you were able to continue solid propellant generation of these gases, you would have the principle of a rocket. That's how a rocket flies. So as these gases exit the barrel, there is a push back towards the weapon as well from the force of the gases.
Okay. And when you say from the force of the gases, then, correct me if I'm wrong, then the way the recoil goes out from the force of the gases is the way the gun's going to go out?
Yes.
And would it follow then that, for instance, hypothetically, if the gun sight caught on caps in the front of someone's mouth, those caps would go out in direction of the way the gun was shot?
Well, they go out in the direction that the weapon recoiled.
Direction recoiled. And what direction does the recoil go out
It
in?
would be back towards the shooter.
Okay, so ultimately, where hypothetically, if caps came out of a mouth, the caps would go back in the direction of the shooter, ultimately.
It did depend upon the orientation.
And when you talk about then, back to the gun, when somebody holds a gun and you have ballistics training in this, and assuming it is a shot in someone's mouth and holding the gun, would you expect to find backspatter? And Jen, could you put up T8 again? Would you expect to find backspatter on the handle of a gun?
You would expect to find it in places that would not be covered by the hand.
Okay. And if, have you, when you are yourself, when you've shot a gun, have you always held the grip of a gun?
Yeah,
And if there was a hand holding the grip of the gun, would you expect to find backspatter?
not normally unless it, for some reason, was able to go between the fingers, but the fingers themselves would block that stuff from coming back and landing on the grip.
In your training to police officers and your history in the Oregon State Police and ballistics, have you ever heard of something called a snap fire?
Yes,
What is that?
especially in some older revolvers, weapons that have a hammer. It was possible to pull a hammer back a part way and release it. And it would have enough momentum to force the primer and discharge a cartridge accidental.
Called accident. Called snap fire. And does a snap fire have any effect on blood spatter?
No, it's still the discharge of a weapon.
Okay. And by the way, in your career dealing with intraoral wounds, have you ever had any intraoral wound investigations?
I can only think of one or two in the course of my career.
Okay. And what were the circumstances involving them?
One that I recall was an older couple, and there were issues, medical issues, and it was basically a homicide-suicide. And the older gentleman shot his wife first, and then shot himself.
And who was the intraoral wound?
The older gentleman.
The one who first killed his wife and then
Yes.
shot himself.
Yes.
In your experience dealing with blood spatter, the blood spatter experts generally get an analysis in intraoral wounds.
Yes and no.
Tell us what you mean.
Through photography and through your notes, what you see. You focus, then you're, and in a circumstance like this, once it's determined that it's a homicide-suicide, then
And is it good?
everything is a crime scene if there is a potential crime involved.
Okay. And would that be good practice?
Yes, that's the way that I taught it.
That's the way you taught it. Okay. And when you also taught, did you teach about how you should think about scenes and whether you get, after you get additional evidence such as blood spatter, interpretations into police?
In the reasoning that you,
Yes.
the mental processes, those begin at the crime scene. And what I think where Ms. Bodden is going is to conduct any type of investigation, thought process involved. Uses those evidence that supports that particular hypothetical. And it's common in law enforcement. It's efficient and effective. An example, you're in a patrol car and someone tells you that there's been a a bank robbery and that the suspect wearing a that fits your scenario, you have probable cause to stop and investigate this particular individual further. In the scientific inquiry, the process is a little different. Matter of.
Can I stop you for a second?
It's common in law enforcement.
And what in the scientific community, what when you evaluate things such as blood spatter?
In the scientific community, we use a process called inductive reasoning. This is first proposed by Francis Bacon in the 1600s. And it's a process where you have to first evaluate all of your data first. And then from looking at all of your data and looking at patterns and information within it, then you formulate a hypothesis at that point.
Okay. And what is the actual difference in terms of when you're using deductive versus inductive reasoning on a day-to-day basis?
Deductive reasoning, you look for facts to support your hypothesis. In inductive reasoning, you look at all of the facts, and out of the facts, you formulate a hypothesis.
Okay. And the scientific method looks at all the facts and formulates the hypothesis, correct?
It should.
Okay. Thank you. I have nothing further.
Thank you, Prosecutor. Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Price.
Good morning, Mr. Jackson.
You started out by, and I'll apologize in advance if I jump around a little bit. I'm going to try to keep this to somewhat of a minimum. I'm going to try to follow some of the points that Ms. Kinney Bodden made. So if I hop around, I'll try to give you a guidepost before I do it. The first thing I'd like to chat with you about for just a second is the subject of luminol. Ms. Kinney Bodden asked you several questions. The procedure, your review of the procedure at the LASD, the Sheriff's Crime Lab.
Yes.
And you said you did review those procedures, and it's an ASCLD lab certified laboratory, correct?
Yes.
You had no issue or quarrel with the procedures that are in place there, correct?
No.
All right. And as a matter of fact, you even reviewed the testimony of Mr. Renteria, Steve Renteria.
At one point I did, yes.
Okay. I assume that you had no quarrel with the procedures that he engaged in. In other words, he conducted the luminol procedurally correctly, in your opinion?
Based upon the information was provided, yes.
Okay. You're indicating that, and I read some of your work that you've published about luminol. I want to make sure that I understand what you're talking about when you say that it can give you a false pattern of spatter when you use luminol in some circumstances.
Yes.
Is what you're indicating, use this, very visual, so I'll use some show and tell if you don't mind. Say I have a blood stain, a sponge, and I spread it on this pad, just a swipe, okay? And so we know that it's pig's blood for our experiment or something like that. And I go ahead and let this dry a little bit, and I set it over here. We darken the room, test it, and I get whatever it is, device, a squirt bottle of some kind. Now we darken the room. You're explaining to jurors that because the aerosol comes out in a spatter itself, that if I just utilize this pattern for my determination of what's on the page, I could falsely assume that there is a spatter pattern on there as opposed to a swipe, because what's luminescing are the little drops that are coming out of the aerosol can, if you will, or the spray bottle onto the pad. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, your conclusion's correct. Your procedure is incorrect.
Okay, what would be the correct procedure?
The correct procedure would be first to darken the room completely to the point that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face.
Okay.
And your eyes would dilate. You'd be able to see very low levels of light.
I see.
At that point, then you would spray your tablet and see small droplets of luminescence at that point.
Okay, now let me change that just a little bit, and let's say in our experiment with pig's blood, the pig's blood, by the way, nothing against pigs, that's what's used in scientific experiments, correct? As opposed to human blood normally.
Depends. I oftentimes use my own blood.
Okay, you're tougher than I am. Let's set the pad down, and we'll use pig's blood for this experiment, for our hypothetical, and say we take a sponge, and let's use a mousetrap, commonly used for high velocity blood spatter, either forward spatter or back spatter. And we snap the mousetrap and go ahead and get some blood on this for our experiment. If the procedure is done correctly, and now we darken the room and our eyes dilate and I can't see the hand in front of my face and I've got luminol in front of me. If I use a power sprayer and I spray over it once, and then again, and again, and again, in a sweeping motion to make sure I cover the area of the pad completely, would you expect, in your experience, that the spatter from the pig's blood, the sponge experiment, that would luminesce on this pad?
Well, yes, that's not normally what we call a high velocity pattern using a mousetrap.
Okay, well, let's say a gunshot.
Yeah, I would expect that it would luminesce. Luminol is very good for larger stains like transfer patterns. Mousetrap will create some large droplets of blood that you might and then subsequently test by some other means.
Okay, now let's, I'll go ahead back. In your opinion, I think high velocity back pattern. Let's use a gunshot, and let's change this experiment. Now I've got this board, and I set it up vertically, and I fire a gun at a sponge. And we're looking at back spatter. Okay, the very small 1 millimeter and millimeter particulate matter that comes backward. Okay, and we can see visually because this is either a yellow or a white board, and we can see there's a minimal amount of back spatter droplet pattern on this. Okay, now I take that board and I do the same luminol experiment. And instead of just squirting it once, I use a power sprayer and I spray across and swipe back and forth, and I make sure I cover that board. Would you 1 millimeter sized particulate matter to luminesce? In other words, is luminol sensitive enough to actually luminesce those tiny little 1 millimeter size particles?
There are as to what you're describing. First of all, you're saying that you already see it on your paper. You know that they're
correct.
Okay?
For my that are on there, would you?
The second issue is you're now applying that, and unless you get your nose really close to them, because oftentimes, if you're looking at millimeter size and smaller, you may not even see them on a wall such as this unless you get very close and get a magnifying glass.
Okay. In this darkened room, the whole point of luminol is that it luminesces. There's a light, if you will, that our human eyes can see, that wavelength that we can see when the iron in the blood connects chemically with the chemicals in the luminol, correct?
Yes.
All right. The whole point is to luminesce or illuminate
Yes.
the iron in the blood, correct?
Right.
All right. So if I can see, for instance, a 1 millimeter sized particle, if I just take a pencil and I just made a little dot on this pad. May I approach? Yes. It's a little bit far. Just made a little dot with my pencil on this pad. Right? You can see that little dot where my finger is?
Yes.
All right. Assume that that's about 0.5 millimeter, because my pencil lead, I think, says 0.5 millimeters. Assume that that's 0.5 millimeter. If I can see that dot from here in dark lead, in normal light, certainly under completely black conditions, in other words, unlighted conditions, if that dot were luminescing, that would be even brighter or more easily seen than the dot on the paper as it stands right now. That's sort of the whole point of luminol, correct?
Yes and no. Again, there are some caveats. I understand what you're trying to say and where you're going with this, but there are a couple of factors that have to be considered. Number one, the degree of any chemical reaction relates to the amount of substrate that you have to react. So the amount of light that's going to emit from this little stain of blood depends on how much substrate you have to react with. The second thing is whether or not you are close enough to see it with your eyes at the distance from which you are spraying this luminol.
Okay.
Because the amount of light that may be generated from a droplet of that size is so slight, you may not be able to see it.
All right. You reviewed Steve Renteria's, well, let me back up before I ask that. What you're saying, and it makes some common sense, is that, for instance, a particulate matter, let's say luminescing that size, it's just a single drop in a room. If I'm walking through a dark room and that happens to be luminescing, you're saying I could walk by and easily miss that, not see it.
That's correct.
Okay. You reviewed Mr. Renteria's notes and reports concerning his procedures as far as the luminol is concerned at the crime scene, correct?
I don't have independent recollection. I know that I looked at them. If there's something specific,
Okay.
Perhaps you bring that forward, we could talk about it.
Sure. Actually, this is general. It's in your mind. What I was asking is, you're aware that Mr. Renteria is actually a very experienced criminalist. In other words, he's not a rookie on the job. This was not his first crime scene. You're aware of that.
I don't know anything about his work history.
Okay. Did you read his testimony?
Some of it, yes.
Okay. From his testimony, did you glean that he is an extraordinarily experienced criminalist who has done many crime scenes? I mean, that was in the testimony. You probably
It was
read
in
that.
testimony. They've done several crime scenes.
Okay. And he is familiar with the luminol procedures at the LASD crime lab.
If he was using it, that would be a reasonable assumption.
And the LASD crime lab is a ASCLD certified crime lab.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, the LASD crime lab, unlike, for instance, the Oregon crime lab that you talked about having 5 to 10 people, actually employs dozens and dozens of people, maybe in the hundreds of people at the LASD crime lab. You're aware of that?
Yes.
Okay, you're aware that it's the second largest crime lab in the country, next only to the FBI crime lab.
I'm not aware of that, but that's fine.
Wouldn't surprise you.
No.
I mean, we live in a pretty big county, correct?
The rules and regulations under ASCLD apply the same no matter how large the laboratory.
Sure, I understand. But what I'm saying is this crime lab is very large.
Okay.
Yes?
Okay.
Okay. Steve Renteria, if you read his testimony, indicated that he is actually certified and has passed all the certifications required, both under the LASD crime lab procedures internally, as well as the ASCLD national and global procedures under their auditing system.
Okay.
Okay. You're aware of that, yes?
No, but I'll take your word for it.
Okay. Assume for purposes of our questioning that Steve Renteria is in fact all of those things, that he's certified, he's extremely experienced, and he has testified that he's been to many crime labs. He's used luminol many times. He actually was the one who mixed the luminol and ensured that the pH balances were correct, et cetera. You're also aware from his testimony that when he luminoled the area in front of Miss Clarkson, all the way over from the chair in which she was seated, okay, or where she was found, all the way over to the dark paneled wall, and that's the first area that he luminoled. You're aware of that, correct?
Okay.
Are you or are you not?
I'm not. No.
Okay. Assume for purposes of our questioning that that's the area that he first began luminol.
Okay.
You would expect as a criminalist that let me ask it this way. You're aware that he was actually specifically looking to identify tiny millimeter size or even sub-millimeter size blood particles on the floor. You're aware that he was specifically looking for that, correct?
Then I would find that
Okay, that having been your opinion,
That's right.
You also indicated that an appropriate application might be to do a microscopic examination of the area of the carpet that you're interested in.
Right. I would cut out the carpet and take it back to the laboratory.
Okay, what if the carpet was the size of the entire foyer that he was luminoling?
You just mentioned the area directly in front of where Ms. Clarkson was seated.
That's the first area he luminol.
If that's the area where you're looking for these small droplets, I would have excised that area of the carpet and taken it back to the laboratory.
Okay, what about the area going all the way up the stairs to the second floor? He
If you're-
luminol that too.
That's fine. I wouldn't mind seeing the process of luminol done if you're looking for drag marks, footprints, larger objects that may be transferred onto the carpet.
Okay, what about the area of the bathroom? Would you excise the entire carpet in the entire bathroom area if you luminol that too?
It depends on what you're looking for.
Okay, what about the wood paneling? Would you have suggested a better procedure would have been to take a crowbar, for instance, remove all that wood paneling along the side of the stairway on that west wall and take that entire west wall paneling back to the crime lab?
The best procedure for something like that would be to do a microscopic examination at the scene.
Okay, and if he luminoled the banister, the area of the banister or the railing, would you also suggest that he remove all the banister pillars and take the entire banister back to the crime lab?
Well, I think you have things a little bit out of order. When you do a crime scene examination, luminol is one of the last things you do. The first thing you do, if you think that there's microscopic blood spatters on the wall or the banister, you carefully examine those at the scene. If you find something that you feel is important, if, for example, the railing on the banister, you think you see droplets of blood on there, you may run a follow-up screening test at the scene. And if you feel that that banister rail is going to be important in your case, you take the banister rail with you.
Okay.
And then after you have done all of your investigative procedures you're going to do at your crime scene, then at that point that you would luminol for looking for blood that you might not have found by any other means.
Okay. You're aware that the procedure that Steve Renteria engaged in, you read his testimony, was exactly what you just described. That he, in fact, looked very closely at the carpet area in front of Lana Clarkson first. You're aware of that?
Actually, that state's testimony was true in terms of, he never said he used a microscope at the carpet.
I didn't say
The question doesn't say microscope. He said very carefully, the objection's overruled.
You're aware that he did, in fact, visually inspect the carpet area in front of Ms. Clarkson very carefully, looking for blood specifically.
Mr. Jackson, I'm going to have to take your word for it. I don't remember word for word that everything I read in the form of transcripts.
Oh, okay, sir, and I'm not trying to test.
I believe you if that's what you're trying to tell me.
Okay, let me ask it this way then, because I'm not, I know you didn't study it and memorize it. I'm not trying to embarrass you at all. Let me ask the question a little bit different way. I think we can get there. Would you say that it was proper procedure based on what you just told the jurors was a proper procedure if Steve Renteria did a visual examination as closely as he could visually in daylight with lights on in the foyer area of the carpet area all the way over to the wall? That would be proper procedure, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Then he looked on the paneling and got very close to the paneling and looked visually as best he could all over the paneling of the area adjacent to the stairway across from Ms. Clarkson. That would be appropriate.
Yes.
Then if Mr. Renteria then went to the banister and saw a transfer mark of blood on the banister that was very obvious, if he then looked on the banister going all the way up the stairs and on the vertical pillars holding the banister up, whatever those are called, visually examined those and found no blood on any of those areas visually, that would be an appropriate procedure.
Yes.
And he did all that during daylight with the aid of ambient daylight as well as lights on inside the foyer area. That would be appropriate.
Yes.
And if Mr. Renteria indicated that he used a flashlight to even more fully illuminate those areas on the carpet, on the west wall, we'll call that the west wall, the panel wall, and on the banister going all the way up, if he did all that, that would be appropriate as at least a first step, correct?
As a first step. Yes.
Okay. You indicated that luminol is sort of the last step at a crime scene to make a determination of blood. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And on that subject matter, Mr. Pex, are you aware that Mr. Renteria actually came back the next day, and in fact, it was the last thing that was done at night, the day after the crime scene had already been cleared? That's the point at which he began to dim all the lights, blacken out the room, and do the luminol. That would be appropriate, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you're aware that, or are you aware that during the course of doing his luminol exam, he used a power sprayer?
Okay.
All right. Are you aware, would it be proper procedure if instead of just spraying one swipe, if Mr. Renteria used that power sprayer and went back and forth over and over in certain areas of the carpet and specifically was looking visually for the luminescence of any blood stains? That would be an appropriate way to try and find those blood stains, correct?
You can oversaturate an area with the liquid that you're spraying.
Okay.
And dissolve any blood that's there, or that you could cause it to run further down into the matting and the carpet.
Sure. But if you were experienced in this technique, that would be something that you would avoid against, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you have no reason to believe, based on everything you've reviewed concerning Mr. Renteria, that he was anything but very experienced in this.
I can't attest to his experience, but from what you're telling me, he was experienced at doing this test.
Okay. You're aware that, and luminol is, although it's, I always get this mixed up, and maybe you can help me with this. See, I get mixed up. I'm trying to think it through before I say it. It's extremely sensitive, but not specific, correct?
Yes.
All right, that's about as clear as mud in my mind. Okay, let's see if we can flesh that out just a little bit for the jurors. Not specific means it will pick up metals, iron in blood, but it'll also pick up metals, for instance, actual metal that has been transferred to a carpet, for instance.
That's correct.
It'll also pick up, I think it picks up onion, doesn't it?
I have had reactions with onions, beets, juices, things that have peroxidases in.
Okay, so there are other things. So that's what we mean by it's not super specific, but it's extraordinarily sensitive, correct?
Yes, it's to diluted blood.
As a matter of fact, in some of your publications, or at least one of your publications, you have indicated that you've seen blood dilutions of 1 to 100 million parts luminesce under luminol.
That was taken from another research article. That's not my personal observation.
Okay, but you referenced
I
that.
published that in the article, yes.
Okay,
So it's
there is
part
published
sharp.
data to that effect.
Yes.
So in other words, luminol is extraordinarily sensitive.
Yes.
And you're aware, or
It's part shark. They took something from a shark and made it fine blood. That has to be it.
are you aware that, for instance, when Mr. Renteria luminoled the foyer area, there was a metal strip on the bottom of the door, the rear door. As that door opens and closes, it drags along the carpet fibers, and that actually luminesced, and he made note of that. Are you aware of it?
No.
Okay, that wouldn't surprise you, though.
No.
All right. There were other areas, or are you aware that there were other areas? Well, I guess I got ahead of myself. Let me just finish off on that first thought about the foyer area before I move into the bathroom. You're aware from your review of all the materials in this case, and I know it's been somewhat of a scant review, that no blood or anything else luminesced in the area from Ms. Clarkson over to the west wall.
I've been told that, yes.
All right. You're aware that nothing luminesced on that entire wood paneled wall. There was no blood, nothing to suggest blood or blood spatter on that wall, correct?
That maybe, yes.
Okay. You're aware that on the banister, and I'm walking through the foyer in my mind, so you'll forgive me, on the banister that curled around on the bottom, the only portion of that banister that luminesced was the visual blood that indicated a transfer pattern on that banister, correct?
I recall something about that, yes.
You're aware that there was no blood to the right, as we're facing west, to the right of the banister going toward that adjacent bathroom area. No blood luminesced on the ground or the floor in that area, correct?
Mr. Jackson, I was never at the scene, and as you're describing these different areas, I have not looked at the evidence and I've never been to the scene, so I can't say for certain yes and no to your answers,
Okay.
but I have no reason to disbelieve you at this point in
Okay,
time.
thank you. And again, I'll change my question a little bit. You would have no quarrel if the testimony was nothing luminesced in the bathroom area.
That'd
I'm
be
sorry,
fine.
in the area adjacent to the bathroom.
Yeah, and the relationship of this area to where Ms. Clarkson is, I'm not well acquainted with these distances that you're talking.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
A final question on that point, just to finish off that thought process. You're aware that Steve Renteria actually luminoled the entire staircase as well, correct?
That would be something to do. I would do the same.
Okay, and are you aware that no blood whatsoever, no blood spatter or anything else luminesced on that stairway going all the way up to that second floor landing?
Okay.
Okay. Ms. Kinney Bodden asked you, and here's my guidepost. We're going to change gears a little bit and talk about the gun. We're still sort of talking about luminol, but I want to change gears and ask you a couple of questions about what Ms. Kinney Bodden brought up about the weapon itself. You indicated that, and I think what you were suggesting, Mr. Pex, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're not sure the luminol procedure was done correctly because you didn't, there wasn't blood found underneath the gun on the carpet area under the gun?
What I said was that if it is reasonable to assume that the blood was on the weapon, and there are photographs that I saw that suggest that what I see on there is blood, that it's probably in a liquid form when it gets to the floor, one would have the expectation that some of that blood would transfer from the gun to the floor.
Okay, fair enough. And that's what I want to ask you about. That is making a very, very broad assumption. The big if in that is if it got to the floor when it was still wet, correct?
Yes.
Okay. There is another explanation for that gun, correct?
If the blood was totally dry and there was no transfer then of that blood to the carpet, then it may not be detectable.
And for instance, one explanation for that blood drying is if the gun was, for instance, wiped off or wiped down, that would certainly thin out that blood, vastly increasing any drying time for the blood, correct?
Yes.
All right. And that blood could dry very, very quickly on the gun.
Yes.
And if that gun was already wiped down, and if there was evidence that the blood had been moved or removed, we'll use that phraseology, and it was dried, and then it was placed beneath her ankle. Later, that gun was removed and that area was luminol, and it came up with no luminescence whatsoever. That would not surprise you, correct?
Yeah, you could come up with either result. You could find some, or you may not find some.
Okay. You would not necessarily expect to find to find blood on the carpet smeared underneath the gun if the gun was already dry when it was placed down there.
It's difficult to say because I've seen several circumstances where people have stepped in blood that was dried, like on carpet, for example, and then taken another step and they have transferred dried blood as a powdery substance to a new location on the carpet. So if the blood was, even though it was dried, it just depended upon the abrasiveness and its actions along with the carpet could remove some even dried blood as flakes onto the carpet. So either possibility exists.
Okay.
Maybe there, may not be there.
All right, and that brings up a good point, actually. If the gun is placed down, I'm going to give you two different hypotheticals. What you're just saying is if the gun is placed down on the carpet in somewhat of a dried state, then it's kicked across the carpet. Even though it's dried, you may expect to see some flaking or dusting off of some of that dried blood, and that would luminesce. That streak mark might luminesce across the floor, correct?
It might.
Okay. However, if you had the gun dried, this is my gun, if the gun was already wiped off and dried and it was placed on the carpet where you saw it underneath Miss Clarkson's leg and it was not disturbed until the police carefully picked it up, you would not necessarily expect to see blood luminesce underneath that portion of the carpet.
You may or may not.
If you didn't, and in this case, assume for purposes of my question that you didn't, that would certainly be an explanation for why you didn't. The gun was already dry and it was placed there.
It could be, yes.
Thank you. I'm going to use another show and tell, and this one's going to include Mr. Dixon. I want to, there's something that's kind of been hanging out there, and I want to do a little demonstration, all right? Miss Kinney Bodden asked you, Mr. Dixon looks scared right now.
He knows you.
True enough, true enough. There was a question, yeah, please. There was a question about Miss Clarkson's legs, okay? And I know you weren't at the crime scene. I'm going to move this over so jurors can get a look at what we're doing. There was a question about Miss Clarkson's legs and a taser wire that you saw in photographs under her leg.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I think Ms. Sahab may have people's 63 for identification up on the computer. I see. Okay, you see that photograph?
Yes.
All right, that's a picture. I know you weren't at the crime scene, but just assume for our purposes that that is a picture, a close-up photograph of Miss Clarkson's legs as she was found at the crime scene. If you look toward the top left of the photograph, you can actually see between her legs, it appears that the gun is on the ground. And if you look toward her right foot, you see that? If you look toward her right foot, specifically toward her right heel, it appears that there is something beneath the right heel, correct?
In terms of the wire?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, you can see that. And I'm going to ask Ms. Sahab to highlight that heel and that area, maybe even a little bit more. Okay, can you see that? Now it's extremely an extreme close-up of that wire underneath the heel. Do you see that?
Yes.
Does it appear to you that you can see a shadow toward the forward portion of the heel where the arrow is right now?
Yes.
That would indicate that that heel is actually elevated off the ground to a certain degree, although minimally to a certain degree it's elevated, correct?
Yes.
All right.
In relation to the flash of the camera. You can see
Yes.
that.
Yes, and of course, and I'm talking about in relation to the carpet, it appears that it is elevated to a certain degree because there is in fact a shadow underneath it, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to lay a cord in front of Mr. Dixon's feet, and all he has to do as the model is just sit here. And if you need to, Mr. X, if you might not, I mean, if you might want to step down here so we can see what we're doing, I want to make sure that kind of everybody is on the same page. Can you see, and Your Honor, with the juror, with the court's permission, the jurors need to stand up.
Sure.
Right, the only thing I want to ask you about is, in fact, it appears that there is a taser wire at least partially under the right foot of Ms. Clarkson, correct?
Yes.
All right. If in fact, and Mr. Dixon, if you will lean either your body or there you go, straighten your legs a bit. His right foot appears to be somewhat elevated. I'm not trying to approximate exactly how her foot is, but it appears to be somewhat elevated, correct?
Yes.
All right. If I kick this wire to the right, do you see how that wire ended up under his heel?
Yes.
You will agree with me that Mr. Dixon has not moved his foot at all since I kicked that wire, correct?
Correct.
You will also agree with me that the way that the wire is situated under his right heel right now is consistent with how the taser wire appears on Ms. Clarkson's heel, correct?
Except that her foot is laying much lower than his is.
I understand.
With a wire that's much smaller in diameter.
Correct. And as a matter of fact, we have a smaller diameter wire. Can I see that?
Before you go on, there's just one problem, and the poor television technicians are having a heart attack. I can see what happened. They're under strict orders, and they have not made a mistake yet not to photograph the jurors. And
Yes.
the jurors, when they stand up, get into camera range.
Then,
I don't know how we're going to do this.
I don't either.
We okay? I see this. We're all right. Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
We're okay?
All right.
Okay. I've never seen anybody sit down so fast. All right. Mr. Dixon, do me a favor. Would you turn 180 degrees from where you were? Because I didn't realize. Correct. That way. What I did was I asked Mr. Dixon, and he was facing the other way. For your benefit, the jurors may not have been able to see what I did. If you will keep your feet about where they are. If I, let's say that this cord approximates the taser wire, and I kick that wire once again.
To the heel.
Okay, not inconsistent, although This is not a perfect scientific approximation. Dixon's foot did not move when I kicked the wire.
That's correct.
All right, thank you. Your Honor, would you,
You want to mark Mr. Dixon?
Might as well.
Yes, sir.
basically, for the record, Mr. Dixon to sit comfortably in the chair with his right computer cord on the ground adjacent to his right foot and just in front of it. I kicked the cord toward the back of Mr. Dixon. The cord ended up wedging itself, if you will, toward the heel of his right shoe, and that's what Mr. Pex was describing for us.
Does anybody wish to disagree with him?
Except for the fact that she indicated his heels were on the ground, his feet are 2 inches above.
I have no objection with that
Okay,
representation. That's accurate.
thank you.
It's in the angle of about 45 degrees from the
In any event, okay. I think we have a clear picture, and the jurors were able to get a view. I'm just trying to make a record here. All right.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Have you got a ways to go?
I do, Your Honor.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and take our noon recess, ladies and gentlemen. Keep in mind the admonition, 1:30 this afternoon. The witness will return. Thank you.
I'm not eating ice cream, Nancy. I'm eating cereal. This is my breakfast. I'm eating cereal and a bagel. Actually, it's not cereal. It's granola. It's protein granola. I'm trying to lose weight. I've gained 4 pounds. Yesterday I lost 2. I'm trying to get back down to where I was stuck because I'm not supposed to be gaining. I'm going the wrong way now. So I'm stuck between 212 and 201. I can't get under 200. And it's ticking me off because I'm being a good girl. I really am. Except just every once in a while. Just every once in a while. But for the most part, I'm being very good. And I'm still not losing weight. And it's really making me mad. I have an appointment with a weight loss doctor on June 17th. And he's got to come up with something because I know, one day at a time. I know.
The taser wire on the ground, I want to reverse. I told you that I'd give you some guideposts. I want to reverse, and there was 1 or 2 questions that I forgot to ask you, or I may have, and I forgot that I did ask you about the luminol. When you reviewed Mr. Renteria's reports, you're aware, are you not, that in fact the luminol, there is an indication or a control indication that the luminol was functioning properly insofar as it did luminesce certain areas of the foyer in the bathroom, correct?
You in the doorway.
Are you aware of this or not? But I just ask it, are you aware that the area in the bathroom where a bloody rag was found had been removed and he luminol that area of the bathroom where it was just sitting on the ground, and that area did luminesce? That would certainly be suggestive of the idea that the luminol was working properly, at least insofar as the pH balances. And
I shouldn't be eating the bagel. Travis had to go to the girl's house, the ex house, because they still live with their mom. Kristen bought a used car. They buy used cars like from people, not like from car lots, from people, which I think is a very bad decision, but they do it anyway. And then these cars are pieces of crap. They constantly need work. So half the time they come over, to spend time with us, but then while they're here, oh, Daddy, can you look at my car? Because it's not working right. So she called the other day. I want to say it was Monday. Daddy, can you come over here and look at my car? There's something wrong with it. Of course, her stepdad was there too, which he can't stand stepdad because that's why their marriage broke up. So he's over there looking at the car. Before he leaves, I'm like, no food. Do not, because every time he's around this woman, she gives us food. No food. I don't want any food. When people give us vegetables, I have to cook them, and I don't want to cook. I'm on a diet. I don't eat any food. Bring no food home. So then, I don't remember if he left or not. Casey texts me and says, do you like Cajun seasoning? I said, no food. I'm on a diet. Don't send any food home. And then I said, no, I don't really like Cajun. I don't like anything that's super spicy. So I'm thinking, okay, there will be no food this time. He comes in with, guess what? A bag of food. Like, what part of no food do y'all not understand? He said, she just came out to the trunk and opened it and put a bag of food in the truck. I said, that doesn't mean you had to bring it home. You could have opened the trunk and put it out on the ground. I said no food. Oh my God, woman. Why? So I got 3 loaves of whole grain bread, which that's fine because I eat whole grain bread. And a thing of bagels that I shouldn't be eating, but I love bagels. That's why I don't buy them, because I'm not supposed to have a bunch of bread. Now the whole grain bread is okay, and it was thin sliced too, but there's like 3 loaves. And we don't have any room in our freezer, so they're probably going to go bad before I can eat them all. And a bunch of vegetables. Now, I made a squash casserole yesterday out of the squash. That's the toughest squash I've ever eaten in my life. So the whole casserole is garbage because you can't eat the squash. They're tough as heck. So now I have all these vegetables that I have to toss because I don't trust any of them that were in that bag because the squash were so disgusting. The last time she brought us food, it was meat that stunk to high heaven. I think I already told you guys that story. I'm like, no more food, woman. Why do they keep giving us food that we can't eat? Oh my God. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled program. That was my rant, and it is over.
I don't want to get into the chemistry of it, but it was working right, correct?
Appears to be, yes.
Okay. Ms. Kinney Bodden asked you some questions, and again, here's the gear shift. Ms. Kinney Bodden asked you some questions about the nature of intraoral gunshot wounds particularly. And you talked a little bit about some of your publications in the past and some publications that have been brought up between you and Mr. Vaughn. We've called it Pecs and Vaughn. Now we have the Pecs. Maybe we'll meet the Vaughn before it's all over. And you indicated that you did talk about some of the basic standards in gunshot wounds and back spatter and forward spatter in that particular article some 20 years ago, 1987, I think, correct?
Yes.
In that article, you also use as a reference other articles and other publications in the general field of back spatter and gunshot wounds, et cetera, correct?
Yes.
That's normal procedure for a scientist to refer to other scientists' published works to either establish the foundation for their findings or to simply support or corroborate their findings, correct?
Generally, you reference other publications in your introduction and say that these things are known, so you don't have to re-explain them all again. If you want to If the reader wants more information, they can refer to these publications to find more information.
Okay, and you did that, and as a matter of fact, you gave credit where credit was due, which is normal in the industry, and you have a list of references, correct?
Yes.
And in that list of references, you reference some work by Dr. Peter DeForest and Ganslin that was published in Forensic Science. I think the name of the article was An Introduction to Criminalistics, correct? Take a look at reference number 3.
Yes.
Okay, and if you want to glance while you're still on that page at reference number 8, you also reference Tom Bevel and some of his work and a publication that he entitled Geometric Bloodstain Interpretations, correct?
Yes.
And that was published in the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin, correct?
Yes, in 1983.
Okay, both of those publications were 1983, correct?
Yes.
And then you published this in 1987, a few years later.
Yes.
Okay. In this particular article, you are talking about, at least in a portion of it, you were talking about backspatter and the small particulate matter, talking about millimeter and smaller sized particles and how far they travel. And I think you referenced that they travel about 2 feet based on your experience and the information that you knew at that time.
Yes.
All right. Is it safe to say, and I think we've heard some reference to this, in the intervening years, you've seen reference to some backspatter that actually has been seen traveling a little further, maybe up to 3 feet, sometimes in laboratory environments up to 4 feet.
Yes, I'm not familiar with perhaps every article that's been published.
Sure.
But backspatter droplets can vary in size. And of course, the larger ones are going to travel farther than the smaller ones.
Okay. And that's a kind of a rule, if you will, if not a scientific law that we can put in place. That's a rule that we've heard over and over. The larger particles have greater mass, greater density. Air friction works less effectively against them. Gravity works more effectively on them. Therefore, larger particles may travel under the same force and velocity, may travel a little further than small, tiny particles, correct?
Well, you're close.
All right, close enough for our purposes and the jurors' purposes.
They have larger diameter.
Okay.
They have the same density.
Okay,
The effect of gravity would be the same.
okay,
Therefore, their ability to travel further would probably have to do with the initial inertia when they started out.
okay, good explanation. And the fact of, and we touched on this a little bit, I may get into this a little bit more, but while we're here, there is a terminal velocity that is associated under Stokes' law with an item traveling through a viscous material like air.
Yes.
Okay, and that's basically, that guides us, science guides us through Stokes' law, basically, on that issue.
On a vertical surface, yes, vertical
Okay.
direction.
When you say vertical direction, you're talking about
Straight down.
going straight down. So is it your opinion that Stokes' law does not apply to something traveling horizontally?
The Stokes' law principle in this circumstance probably has a very little application. I thought at the time that it had greater application when I wrote the article, but at this time I feel it has very little application.
Okay. But you're not saying that if something reaches a terminal velocity, say for instance dropping, let's say we're in a helicopter and we're 1,000 feet up and we drop a droplet of blood, however large that is, that blood will reach a terminal velocity. In other words, a point at which it can't go any faster because of its surface area and mass as related to the air friction that it's undergoing, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, it will reach a particular, let's say, mile per hour, because that's what we can relate to, and it will not go any faster than that particular mile per hour.
That's correct.
Okay, if that same, now we change things a little bit, and instead of dropping it 1,000 feet from a helicopter and it reaches its terminal velocity and goes no faster, it doesn't accelerate anymore. Now we change that, and we somehow hurl that item horizontally, parallel to the surface of the earth, all right? Is it your testimony that there is no such thing as terminal velocity for that item traveling horizontally?
The definition for terminal velocity in the definitions that I understand deal with vertical objects falling vertically and by the effect of gravity.
Okay.
When droplets travel horizontally, it's the same as a bullet that travels horizontally. You have to have initial energy to get it in motion and moving. when it's out in the atmosphere, it encounters resistance and it encounters gravity. When it has greater mass, it's capable of traveling a greater distance. The density of a small droplet and a large droplet is going to be the same.
And of course, when something is traveling through a viscous material like air, that droplet, the effect of the, let's call it wind resistance or air friction, that air friction is going to be exactly the same, whether it's dropping straight down or going vertically or at a 45-degree angle or anything else, correct?
Well, here's where we run into problems with Stokes' law. Stokes' law looks at a liquid from a standpoint of both density and viscosity. And I'm not sure how viscosity applies to air. It may apply to some gases that you're capable of pouring, but viscosity is a circumstance where molecules slide past each other and capable of being developing friction with the surrounding surface. I don't know how viscosity applies to air. We have air resistance, and that is a process that deals probably with density. Density will be related to temperature. And I'm not sure, other than that and gravity, those are the two primary factors.
All right. And there is the laws of physics, whether you call it Stokes' law or whether you utilize Stokes' law or any other law, Newton's laws or anything else, the laws of physics will dictate how an item moves through the air and is acted upon by forces like gravity, air friction, things like that, correct?
Well, they should.
Okay. As a matter of fact, that's why it's called, I don't want to get into a physics class, but that's why they're called laws, for instance. They're not called hypotheses.
Yeah, there are many laws in physics. The application of those laws and how they apply to an explosive environment is the circumstance here that we deal with.
I understand, but what I'm saying is laws don't change. Stokes' law is always going to be Stokes' law.
That's always going to be, it's the application of the law.
Your previous article, you did indicate that, at least at that time, that the small particulate matter backspatter, the tiny particles, would travel about 2 feet, correct?
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, you went on to say that because of that, you can do some inductive reasoning, I guess, and make a determination, Mr. Pex, that things that have that type of particular matter on it were relatively close in proximity to the backspatter causing event, correct?
Back up and please break your question down a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, I might be able to do it better. I might be able to quote you a little bit. Do you remember writing the following, and you're much more articulate, and let this make sense, that the trajectories of these small droplets are controlled primarily by air friction. You remember writing that? If indeed air friction is the dominant mechanism, then it is not surprising that small droplets are not observed at great distances.
Correct.
Correct. All right. You also indicate, and you've talked a little bit about it, but here's where you get into Stokes' law. You say in the limit of small velocities, Stokes' law limit, the distance traveled should be nearly proportional to the droplet size. What you're saying in that is that if you can make a generalized determination as to the droplet size, there is a distance at which you would expect to find those droplets travel if they start off with the same initial velocities.
If they all start off with a constant, yes.
All right. And from that, you went on to explain through this paper that if you find that the small droplets on an object, it had to be relatively close by to the spattering event.
Within the limits of the experimental model that we presented, yes.
Correct. So in other words, in your experimental model, which is what we're going on this paper, if you found small millimeter or sub-millimeter size particles on, say, for instance, a chair, through inductive reasoning, you could calculate that, in fact, the chair was within a certain number of feet of the spattering event, correct?
Utilizing inductive reasoning would require that you consider all possibilities.
Correct.
Chair may not have been at that position at the time that the incident occurred and the blood was let. It might have been moved. So that also includes inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning would also include that you may have outside forces. I indicated if you had a crime scene that was outside and you had forces such as wind, that might cause the droplets to travel a greater distance.
Sure.
So with inductive reasoning, you have to consider all these possibilities when you're doing your evaluation.
Okay, with inductivity, I'll begin to eliminate them based on the fact scenario that's presented to you. Is that right, Mr. Pax?
That I develop.
Okay, so for instance, if you had a fact scenario that was presented to you and it did not include the gunshot being outside with wind, but rather inside a room, for instance, in this case, a foyer,
Yes.
you would not consider that wind was a factor in moving that blood, correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
If you had no indication that there was a fan behind the victim, for instance, when the shot was fired, and a fan was not blowing and whirling and creating any kind of turbulence or creating a columnized airflow, you would not consider that would be you would eliminate that from your consideration as the mechanism that moved the blood, correct?
Yes.
If you had no tornadoes or hurricanes inside the foyer, that could be pretty easily eliminated, correct?
Yes, I suppose.
And if in fact there was no indication that a spray can or an aerosol can that was built under pressure and had a relatively sustained airflow in the foyer at the time, you wouldn't consider that the blood droplets might have gotten caught in that paint can airflow and moved that way, correct?
Well, I don't know how you would get liquid blood into a pressurized paint can.
I don't either.
Yeah, I guess we could exclude that possibility.
All right, we could exclude a lot of possibilities based on the fact scenario that's presented in front of you. And that's kind of the hallmark of doing a crime scene investigation, correct?
Yes.
Okay, we'll talk about that in just a second. Before I get completely off track, I want to ask you a few more questions about intraoral gunshot wounds particularly. One of the things that you indicated on direct examination, Mr. Pex, was in your experience you had seen only one intraoral, or maybe you said two, intraoral gunshot wounds, correct?
Yes.
All right, so suffice it to say, it's rare enough in your experience that you don't have a lot of practical experience with crime scenes involving intraoral gunshot wounds.
That's correct.
And it's also pretty obvious that in your experimentation, you use things like, well, I use the example of a mousetrap. Maybe you don't use a mousetrap. You use things like gunshots in a laboratory environment, sponges, pig's blood. You might wrap a sponge in plastic and soak it in pig's blood. You might drape a sponge underneath a cloth, then fire into it, things like that, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and obviously you can't approximate or duplicate an intraoral gunshot wound because you can't shoot people in the mouth, correct?
You got it.
All right. That having been said, you're aware of no data, published data, that suggests that in an intraoral gunshot wound, the back spatter from a .38 caliber will travel 96 inches.
I have seen no data published on intraoral gunshot wounds associated with back spatter.
Thank you. So when Ms. Kinney-Bodden asked you about certain experimentation, and I think you mentioned the term 96 inches, and we'll get to that in just a second, you are not approximating an intraoral gunshot wound particularly. You were simply explaining to Ms. Kinney-Bodden that there are certain circumstances in which columnized blood, and when I say columnized, I'm sorry, you're right, columnized, thank you. You do better than we should switch places, except I couldn't answer my own questions. Columnized air may force a particular matter, a particle in that air to go a little further. You're not saying that's how far back spatter goes in an intraoral gunshot wound, correct?
You are correct.
Thank you. One of the things that is so very important in doing a proper crime scene investigation and coming to conclusions through inductive reasoning is to make sure that you have available to you all of the facts surrounding that particular circumstance, correct?
Yes.
That
Well,
would mean-
you seldom have all of the facts available to you when you're at a crime scene. Facts generate during the course of an investigation.
Yes, sir. You want to gather as many facts as you can, I suppose. That's probably a more accurate way of saying it.
Before you initiate your crime scene investigation, yes.
Right. And then through the process of looking at what's actually there in front of you, that's when the inductive reasoning kicks in and you start making conclusions, but not until you kind of have a full global or universal view of all the facts that are at least available.
Right, you want to look for not only facts that agree with what people have told you, but you want to look for things that may not.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Puppies Rule. Ardo got another membership. Naomi Penalto. Randy again. Anthony White. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's only 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You said 10. I only see 5 new members. And it didn't get Nancy. Huh. Thank you. That's weird. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure. Okay. It's important, therefore, for a criminalist to actually go to the scene. I think you said when you were working as a criminalist for the Oregon State Police, you would often go actually to the scene as opposed to just looking at photographs or reading reports later, correct?
Absolutely.
Why is that so important, Mr. Banks?
It has to do with our training. And as scientists, we are trained to follow the very procedures you're talking about, inductive reasoning. We want to be somewhat independent of the law enforcement. To go to a crime scene, have specialized training. You want to evaluate all of the data that's there, not just focus in on specific things that might support the information that you've been told. And people who have scientific backgrounds are familiar with scientific method, understand that.
So I gather from what you're saying, Mr. Pex, that actually taking into consideration the facts of this case would be extraordinarily important in making a determination on reconstruction or what actually happened, the blood spatter patterns and things like that.
I'm sorry, I guess I missed your question.
Sure. I'm saying in making a determination of, let's talk about reconstruction of this case.
Of this case.
The case that's before the bench right now.
Okay.
Right. It would be extremely important to make sure that we look at the actual facts of this case, not just theoretical models that have been done in labs before, but the actual facts of this case, and then apply the laws of physics that you've learned over the years and your experience, applying your experience and on-the-job expertise, applying those years of experience and background to the actual facts in this case.
Yes.
Okay, that would be the hallmark of any good investigation, correct?
Yes.
That's why criminalists are not theorists in theory. They're applied scientists. In other words, you go out to the crime scene, you roll your sleeves up, you take measurements, you take photographs, you touch and sniff and smell and scratch things so that you can get an idea of what the facts in that case are, correct?
Well, pretty close.
In other words, we
are analytical scientists. That is a certainty. That doesn't mean that we don't consider how things happen as well as what we observe things.
Sure. And for instance, one of the things that is, I think, pretty obvious, we've been talking about back spatter, Ms. Kinney-Bodden asked you a lot about it. You indicated that there are certain particles that can travel a certain distance. And one of the things that is implied in that statement, if a particle can travel, let's say, 4 feet, that particle can also travel 3 feet, correct?
Yes.
That particle could also travel 2 feet.
Yes.
And it could also travel 1 foot, and a half a foot, and 3 inches and 2 inches, correct?
That's correct.
So in other words, implied in your explanation to the jurors about the distance traveled or potentially traveled by small particles is the fact that they could also be intercepted early. Is that right?
Their directionality in the experiments that we run may not be truly horizontal.
Sure.
They may be at other angles, which might cause them, say, for example, if they go upward, they might fall at a short and land closer. They may have been ejected from the, if I had the experiment on a board like this
Yes.
and a bloody sponge and I shoot at it, the expanding gases might force blood droplets right down towards the floor.
Sure. Sure.
So that you will see of droplets of a similar size, you may see them out to a certain distance, but you may not see them beyond that distance within the experimental model that you put together.
Right, and Your Honor, may I, for demonstrative purposes, if you're talking about blood that could potentially travel from me to you, say 5 feet, I'm maybe 5 feet from you, blood, and look the same, in other words, the size doesn't change at this distance, correct?
Yes.
And it
The
could also,
size of the sphere when it's in the air doesn't change.
okay, so obviously it could also travel this distance and it would look the same once on the fabric, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for that, Mr. Price. You can't say based on simply the size, other than saying it won't travel further than a particular distance, you can't say how close it is, correct?
Just from a purpose of a few droplets, no.
Okay, but there are patterns that begin to emerge in any crime scene where you're looking at back spatter, correct?
Yes.
And those patterns are somewhat important to take into consideration, is that right?
Yes.
With regard to the pattern that you see at a crime scene, it's important to take into consideration not just, for instance, one fact, like blood on a particular item. You might want to take into consideration blood on a particular item, the absence of blood somewhere else, blood on an item next to the first item that had blood on it, absence of blood somewhere else, things of that nature. In other words, you're taking into consideration all the facts, correct?
That's correct.
Assume for purposes of my question that Ms. Clarkson's legs were extended the way that you see them in the photographs that you've reviewed for Ms. Kinney-Body, okay?
Yes.
Assume that she's found in the position that she was found in the chair. In other words, leaning backward, her legs extended all the way out in front of her at somewhat of an angle.
You said she's found in the position she's found.
Correct. She's found in the position that she was photographed. I'm just trying to make sure that.
Okay, that's clear.
I'm not sure which photographs you've seen, Mr. Pex. Did you see photographs of Ms. Clarkson in the chair?
Yes, I did.
Okay, assume she's found like that, all right?
Okay.
And you saw where her slip was.
Yes.
And you saw that her slip came down to about mid-thigh because it had been pulled up and wrinkled a little bit, indicating that she had scooted in the chair a little bit, correct?
Perhaps.
All right.
Hey, madam.
Her top of her thighs from mid-thigh to knee was exposed.
Yes.
From knee down to her foot was exposed.
Yes.
Her shoes were exposed.
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware that blood spatter, that mist-like or high-velocity blood spatter in the area of 1 millimeter and smaller was found about down to the mid-thigh area of her slip dress and no further?
Yes, I am.
You're aware that no blood was found on her hose, on her legs, correct?
Yes.
You're aware that, and when I say her legs, I'm talking about the portion of her leg that doesn't bend from mid-thigh to knee.
Yes.
You're aware that nothing was found, no blood was found beneath her knees.
Yes.
You're aware that nothing or no blood was found on her shoes.
Yes.
You're aware that the chair in which she sat, there was high-velocity backspatter found on an arm of the chair.
Yes.
Okay. You're also aware that.
I looked at some of that. I'm not such sure that's what that is, or whether that's blood that's dripped into blood, but I have not examined that chair. I just saw a few photographs and that question comes up. I don't know the answer.
Okay, but if an experienced criminalist were to actually examine the chair itself, that would lend itself to a better interpretation than simply looking at some photographs.
Yeah, I would want to, if I was to make an evaluation of that chair, I would want to look at the chair.
Okay. Also, the purse was evaluated, and the actual photograph, I'm sorry, rather than just photographs, the actual purse was evaluated, and the strap of the purse indicated some high-velocity backspatter on that as well.
Yes, I believe I saw that.
All right. That would certainly indicate to you, and by the way, did you look at the jacket itself?
No, I've never seen any of the evidence in this case.
Okay, you've never been to the crime lab?
No.
As a matter of fact, you've never even been to the foyer area?
No, I have
All
not.
right, never been inside Mr. Spector's house?
No.
So your testimony is, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, I'm just making sure we have a full view of what it was that you reviewed. Your testimony is predicated on questions that Ms. Kinney-Bodden has asked you, your review of reports, and your review of some photographs.
That's correct.
Okay. Obviously, if you wanted to give a more detailed reconstruction of this scene, you would want to have seen the crime scene itself. You would have wanted to see all the physical evidence as well as review all the reports and the photographs, correct?
Absolutely.
Sure. Certainly, if there was no high-velocity backspatter found on her legs, from mouth to mid-thigh or so, 2 foot, 2.5 area. If there was no high-velocity backspatter, that would certainly indicate where the high-velocity backspatter was limited to in its travel.
That's correct.
So if in fact smaller, say going all the way down to 1/3 of a millimeter or so, and that was found on another object through inductive reasoning, we could put that object, whatever it might be, say for instance, within that same general area. I don't mean to invade your personal space or.
You are, but that's okay.
Good point. Good point.
I liked her better than you.
I expected that answer. All right, fair enough. Just for purposes of this question, you would expect that the consistent spatter on that other object would be within the general realm of the spatter that you actually saw at the crime scene.
I know that what you're referring to is the white jacket.
Correct.
And that if that jacket was within the distance of the spatter you see on the person, then that would be reasonable.
With regard to, I told you that I might visit with you for a second about the paint can. When you indicated that you have personally
94.
94 inches, okay. On the top of it with a sustained flow under pressure of matter wind.
That's what I said.
Okay. That is
I love it when you're here. It says I lost audio. So, since I lost audio, and court is going to start in a few minutes, let's just go ahead and stop here. We're at the 30-minute mark. Because this is like an hour and 19 minutes long. And it's like 10 minutes till 10. And I need to take a break. Although they probably won't start right at 10 because they don't do that. But Okay. So this is going to redirect you to Karen Reed. And I'm going to take a little bit of a break. And I will see you back at 10 o'clock for Karen Reed. And we will finish up with him in the morning before the Karen Reed trial. So I will portal you guys over there, and I will see you in a few minutes. Bye.